right. Nice to see you all. Good to be back. That one was for Noah. That's like Noah's our resident deadhead. I'm sure there are others of you out there. Nice to see you all. Been off for a few weeks, and I'm sad to say that I'm no longer unemployed. It's fun to be unemployed when you know there's a job coming. It's not fun to be unemployed when you don't, but I had this job coming, and I just started. Today is my first day at my new job. I work for this I'm going to put it in the chat. So I work for this organization now. But I am really hoping to keep a strong relationship with Ikar. Ikar hosts this class, and I'm going to continue to teach this class and do other things with Ikar, but definitely this class and the podcast that we built around this class, that we podcast this class, and then we also have special episodes. We just released one with Mayim Bialik on the topic of the brain in Torah. She's many things, but she's a neuroscientist, and that was fun. And we're working on another one. So all of which is to say, this is the connection point to this community that I've been with for the last 5 years, and that I love so much, and I'm glad to have this space to not break ties. And I'm also excited to work for this new organization. I hope, is that better? There's a light there. Maybe that's better. This new organization. I hope that you all that the communities that I have been a part of, that I am becoming a part of, all come together and work together, and that we're all elevated. Yagdil Torah v'yadir, may Torah grow in Los Angeles and across the world. Okay, so that's just me screwing my head on after like a couple months off, and we haven't taught this class for a few weeks. A couple weeks I was on vacation, and then last week was Shavuot. We don't have a Parsha. When there isn't a Parsha, we skip class. But we're back, and we're back now in the book of Numbers. We just started that before Shavuot. We read the first reading, and this week's reading is Parshat Naso. So the second reading in the book of Numbers. Today we're going to look at the reading. We're looking at one section from the reading, and we'll certainly be in the Parsha, but today we're going to take special look at the Haftarah, the reading. So we study the weekly Parsha, the portion, the section of the Torah that is assigned one every week, so that we can cycle through it every year. And I really believe that that's one of the most important rhythms in Jewish life. Of course, it's the Shabbat rhythm, which maybe is the most important rhythm in Jewish life, but attaching your weekly cycle to a reading in the Torah creates this sort of merger between the content of our tradition and the practice of our tradition, and just being in this ritualized way of following a story. You've heard me say many times before, something that I think is life-changing, and that's what this class is all about. So there's a weekly Torah reading. There is also every single week, as many of you know, there's a weekly reading from the books of the prophets, the middle section of the Hebrew Bible, of Tanakh. And every Parsha has a Haftarah assigned to it. That's a funny word because it always sounds like half Torah, Haftarah, but it's not. It's Haftarah, meaning like the completing, the maftir, the thing which completes the reading. And so we link the Torah to the rest of the Bible by saying, oh, the Torah is completed through the prophets, or continued through the prophets. And we're going to look, so on any given week, we could look at the Parsha, we could also look at the Haftarah. And often the Haftarah is a kind of, in some ways, it's the first form of commentary on the Torah. we study a lot of commentary on the Torah here, but in some ways, the prophetic readings, well, the prophets themselves are constantly referring back to the events of the Torah. Isaiah is always making reference to the prophecy of Moses, but also the tradition, what they call the Masoretic tradition, the folks before the rabbis who mapped a lot of this stuff out and said, oh, we'll do this reading on this week, and we'll attach this prophetic reading to it. I say prophetic, again, I'm referring to not just the spirit of prophecy, but a specific section in what we call Tanakh. Tanakh is the Hebrew Bible, and that's Ta, Torah, Na, Nevi'im, prophets, and Ch, Ketuvim, the later writings. So those are the sections you'll find the Torah, then the books of the prophets, some of which are narrative, like Joshua, Judges, and Samuel and Kings, and some of which are just epic books of prophecy, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and on and on. And then the last section has things like Psalms, and it's a little bit miscellaneous, but not in a in a good way. All of the stuff that now that we finish the kind of the great narrative of our people, what other writings are essential, and Psalms is probably the most famous, but there's Job and Ruth and all that kind of stuff, the Megillot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My point is to say it's from that middle section, the works of the prophets, that we find the Haftarah, and often the Haftarah is a kind of direct commentary is offered as a look. This issue that we saw in the Parsha is being reflected on, or continuing, or being processed hundreds of years later in the writings of the prophet. So there's some sense of a through line, and often there's a dialogue. Maybe the prophet is saying something a little different than the Parsha did, and that will be the case today. Because today the Haftarah is the beginning of a really juicy story, really one of the most dramatic and sort of action-packed stories in Tanakh, and that is the story of Shimshon Hagibor, of Samson, the mighty, almost like superhero of ancient Israel. And there, you probably have some sense of the legend of Samson being, incredibly powerful, sort of like the Hulk, like nobody could defeat him. Maybe you've even read the story, which has weird scenes like Samson, killing a lion and then eating honey from its stomach, and just like going, he's a bit of a wild man. And in another class, we could just take a tour through the story of Samson, because it's a crazy story, and he doesn't come off so great. I mean, he's running around like, lusting after women and food and wine and power, and yet he was one of the judges of ancient Israel, and which was a term that meant just leaders of ancient Israel, and he's seen as a hero, and he's a representative of God. And that we'll see already today, but we won't get into his full story today. Today, we're just going to look at the introduction to the story, the one that forms the Haftarah. And the reason that we're going to do that is because the one other thing that Samson was, besides just like a big, strong guy, is that Samson was a Nazirite, or a Nazir in Hebrew. And it's the Nazir vow that we're going to start with. That appears in the Torah and is worthy of consideration itself, but we're going to do what we often do in this class, which is try to sort of string through connections from this Parsha to the story of Samson, and then we'll even take it one step further. Okay, so here we are, we're back. Let's start making the those connections that bring the Torah to life. Okay, so we'll say a little blessing to get into it today, a blessing over Torah study, thanking God for this space that we have, even when we switched jobs and we're in a hotel room in San Francisco, and life is just sort of, constantly moving, and yet the rhythms of our people keep us in lockstep, and the technology of our age allows us to do that even all across the globe. So thank God for that. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so let's begin, and we'll begin by taking a look at the Nazir, the Nazirite vow, which appears here in the book of Bamidbar early on. And there's two things to kind of to say about the Nazir. One is just in the technical language of the Torah. One becomes a Nazir, which we'll soon see what that entails, by taking a vow. You're taking a vow. And that will be very significant to us. So you take a vow and you become a Nazir. And a vow is something that you elect to do. That a vow, in the simplest terms, is an obligation that you commit to taking on by yourself. I often say to couples when I'm officiating at their wedding, we don't do vows at weddings, because vows, it's not like, of course you're pledging to your partner to all these beautiful things, but vows turns it into law in this tradition. So we're very, very careful. We don't just utter a vow. It's a very delicate thing to utter a vow. And we've seen vows before, mostly in the context of sacrifices. And towards the end of the book of Numbers, we'll get the real section on vows, which makes it clear that you are allowed to take a vow, to voluntarily obligate yourself in any way. Meaning you could say, I'm not saying it, I'm not making a vow. What Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur is all of the vows. Like, we're that nervous. So like, did I accidentally make any vows this year? That's the first thing I'm thinking of when I enter into Yom Kippur, because I don't want to be held accountable for that which I did. So I'm even nervous giving an example, but the example is, what if I were to make a vow saying, I vow not to have any chocolate this year, because I'm committing to that, or no cigarettes this year, or no healthy things, no vegetables this year. Whatever it is, I can abstain from something by taking a vow, okay? Okay, and vows are usually associated with abstention, with like relegating something as forbidden to oneself, as opposed to a commitment, which can be done through an oath or a pledge. I swear to do this. A vow is usually, I abstain from this. Okay, so vows are possible in this tradition, though we do them with great caution. But this vow is a particular vow. It seems to be a kind of an institution, and it's a strange one. And from the very start of our analysis, we will be wondering whether this is a good thing or not. And that is the other thing that I want to say, just before we look at it, is that the issue of vows, and especially the Nazirite vow, brings up a very big topic in religious life across the panoply of faith traditions, which is the topic of asceticism, self-denial. And that is a spiritual practice in all kinds of traditions. Almost seems like every religious tradition has some form of self-denial. But as probably, if I were to say to you, is Judaism in favor of self-denial? Well, we'll begin to have that conversation. But I bet a lot of you, the instinct would be, I don't think so, right? That we're a religion that doesn't preach self-denial, self-affliction, asceticism, or do we? Okay, and the Nazir is really the place to talk about that. All right, so let's talk about it. So let me give you a source sheet here. Getting used to this again. Here's a source sheet, and we'll take a look first just at the section from the Book of Numbers. Okay. So here we go. We're going to try and identify what exactly is going on here and see what we think of it. And I'll try to bring in some commentaries from the tradition, because there's been a lot of debate about, again, that basic question: is this a good thing? Why is this here? What are the terms? So let's first try to identify what are the terms. What does a Nazirite vow constitute? So, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God spoke to the people saying, speak to the Israelites and say to them, Daber b'nei Yisrael martaleim, ish o isha, if any men or women, both, explicitly utter a Nazirite's vow to set themselves apart for God. This is supposed to be on the, there's a funny formatting in Safari, but this is Hashem, this stand-ins for God, and it's supposed to be on the other side of this 3, but I think something with the formatting makes it weird. But this is the phrase. A man or a woman explicitly utters a Nazirite's vow. The explicitly part is because the verb here is a little bit of a strange one. Ki yafli lindor. Ki yafli lindor. And the yafli here, this is sort of related to the language of a wonder or a miracle, a pele. So there's something explicit or dazzling, or it jumps out and makes, this is an unusual language. So don't worry about it. But for those keeping track in the Hebrew, this is an interesting verb to take note of. Ki yafli lindor neder. Okay, so this is the word for vow, and you see it doubled here. Lindor, the verb, neder, the vow. Okay, so that's one word that we'll be taking account of. And the other one is, what kind of vow is it? It's a Nazir vow. Nazir, what does that mean? There's also a lot of debate here. Lahazir laHashem, to set themselves apart. Okay, I think there is debate among the commentators. What does Nazir mean? But I'll tell you what I think, which is that it's related to the word for zar, which means strange. And so lahazir is to estrange oneself. Okay? In other words, I take a vow to separate myself, to set myself apart, to estrange myself from everything else for God. That just already gives you a feeling. What exactly is going on here? Someone takes a vow to separate themselves from, well, let's see. Now we'll see what this constitutes of. So there are 3 major prohibitions, so let's try to take note of what they are. 1, they shall abstain from wine and any other intoxicant. Miyayin v'shechar yazir. And not just alcohol, but any vinegar of wine or any other intoxicant, or anything in which grapes have been steeped, nor eat grapes fresh or dried. Throughout the term as Nazirite, they may not eat anything that is obtained from the grapevine, even seeds or skin. Okay, so that's prohibition number 1, no grape products. It seems like initially it's about getting drunk, which makes some kind of sense, right? Like to abstain from getting drunk, that's one of the main abstentions that people find themselves wanting to make. But it's actually more than just anything related to grapes. Okay. What else? Throughout the term of their vow as a Nazirite, no razor shall touch their head. Right? Ta'ar lo yavor al rosho. No razor shall touch their head. It shall remain consecrated until the completion of their term as Nazirite of God. The hair of their head being left to grow untrimmed. Okay, so 1, no grape products. 2, no haircuts. And then, and I must say, abstaining from haircuts, we are probably familiar with that practice in some other Jewish contexts, including when you are in mourning, right? When you're in the first 30 days of mourning someone, you, by Jewish practice law, you don't cut your hair. Okay, and then finally, throughout the term, and this one's pretty startling. Throughout the term that they have set apart for God, they shall not go in where there is a dead person. Even if their father or their brother or sister should die, they must not become defiled for any of them, since hair set apart for their God is upon their head. Throughout their term as Nazirite, they are consecrated to God. Okay? And the language there is very strong. Kadosh hu, oops, I just lost it. Kadosh hu laHashem, holy unto God. Okay, now that should remind you, what does it remind? Someone who can't touch the dead because they are holy unto God. That should remind you of the priests. Priests are also not allowed to have contact with the dead, but priests are explicitly given an exception for close relatives. right? They can't touch the dead at all. They can't go to funerals. Even now, someone that observes sees themselves in a priestly lineage doesn't go to the cemetery. Maybe you've seen someone who says they can't go to a cemetery. So there's a general prohibition on priests touching the dead, but they can do it for their close relatives, whereas the Nazir cannot. Okay, so that's quite an imposition. That's quite a prohibition. That's when we talk about cutting off. So no alcohol, no haircuts, and no contact with the dead, even if you're loved ones, because for now, while you're in this vow, you're consecrated to God. Okay. At the end of this, we could keep reading, but I want to not just talk the whole time. So I'm curious what you think of this. At the end of the vow, you make a vow, you decide how long it's for, and at the end, you offer a sacrifice, and you sacrifice unto God, and then you complete your term and cut your hair and all of that. Okay. All right. We'll talk more. We'll name other details as they become relevant. But first, I just want to ask you, what's the deal here? What do you think this is about? There's not a lot of explanation of why someone would take a Nazirite vow. I've maybe suggested some tendency towards asceticism, but that's not explicit. So why would someone vow to be consecrated to God and abstain from these three things? What are the clues here suggesting to you? What is a Nazirite vow meant to do for someone? Why would someone take it on? Okay, great. Let's start with Alexandra.
Thank you. As someone who is long overdue for a haircut, I may be qualified. Joking, but what I love about this, I love how you made the connection to the priests, and it seems like it's an opportunity here. God is saying, look, these people are designated by me to be in holy service, but you all can choose it, and this is open to all of you. And there's an egalitarianism present here that's going to expand and expand as society evolves and evolves. But this relationship with God is individual, and it's up to each of you to choose it. And here's a way you can choose it. And it reminds me also of the concept of Samson, how God created the world through contraction. And there's an aspect of like, here we can the Nazirites contract from a variety of sort of everyday things in order to leave this space for the holiness, for the divine creativity, for light to come in and open up. And if you don't drink, you find other ways of having that ecstatic experience, and other ways become available that are more sort of clear. Oh, this is a connection to God. This is not a dependence on a substance.
Okay. So Alexandra's saying a couple of really, really important kind of framing, giving us a couple of important frames here. One is, why would you become a Nazir? Because you want spiritual elevation. And it certainly seems that the priests have been exalted, elevated, brought into close contact with God. And that's good, lucky for them. Maybe some of us don't want those responsibilities, but if you did want that kind of closeness, there's a mechanism for you to sort of take on a little priestly spirit on yourself. You won't be bringing the sacrifices, but you will be kadosh l'Hashem. You will be sanctified unto God, and that's what you want. You want that spiritual elevation. So that seems like that's why you would do it, in order to have some intense spiritual experience or intense closeness to God. Okay. And the other thing that Alexandra says is, and so when we look at the actual terms of the vow, yeah, that makes sense. If I want to be close to God, maybe I shouldn't get drunk for a while. Okay, like maybe I shouldn't attend to my physical appearance for a while. Maybe I shouldn't even attend to my personal emotional life, or like I want to be just in a little bit of an isolation chamber. And Alexander uses the language of like tzimtzum, of kind of creating space that holiness and God could flow into. Okay, great. Noah, what do you think?
Yeah, the Nazirite vows, I think, are among the where the vows within our tradition that this person, they've decided to take on for themselves this separation from, like, the haircut, for example, on their head. It's like a big distinguishing factor, one for mourning, but here for uh, holiness, and how they do, and the time limit on it is also very key. They could say, for this period, I'm gonna be only holy to God, but I'm wondering, how is that different from, like, Samuel, who's given over to God to be a priest, and and the vows are just very dangerous and very testing at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, good. So Noah's highlighting what will become a major point of consideration for us, which is that whatever is going on in the Nazirite vow, it is a limited term. You decide how long you will commit to being a Nazir. And that we're soon going to look at the differences between that vow and later Nazirites. You mentioned Samuel, who is not explicitly called a Nazirite, but does also seem to be like committed to God, devoted to God. His mother, Hannah, promises that she will devote him to God, and he will not cut his hair. So there's some connection there. Samson, on the other hand, is named as a Nazirite, as we'll soon see. That's where we're headed next. And as we begin to try to figure out what is the difference between Samson the Nazirite and this Nazirite, one of the differences is that Samson is committed to being a Nazir for all of his life. And that seems like a whole new thing, and yet we're borrowing the same term, because what was one of the central features of this Nazirite vow is that it was temporary, or at least, I mean, you could commit to being a Nazir your whole life, but maybe temporary is not the word, but voluntary. Whatever you commit to, and that could be 5 days, and it could be a year. And okay, so that's important too. All right, let's take a couple more comments, and then we'll try to make sure we do get to Samson. Hal.
Yeah, so I wanted to maybe shift the perspective a little and focus less on what the vow means to the Nazirite. Instead, what does the presence of Nazirites mean to the larger community? Because they are still members of society, even though they're precluded in certain. So what does it mean to have these people who look obviously different, with long hair, and who aren't, partaking of other social activities? What does it mean to have them amongst you? And I kind of like the idea of the democratization of priestliness that this suggests, but it's a kind of countervailing force for ordinary people to encounter these Nazirites on a more daily basis.
I love that perspective, Hal. Thanks for shifting our focus a little bit, sort of bird's eye, because that's right. The Torah is allowing this as an option for an individual. So far, we've been thinking about it as an exceptional choice that a person makes for a particular reason, and all that is probably true. But the effect of it, if this institution was taken seriously, is that you see Nazirites around. I mean, they don't leave the community. They are removed, but they're removed within the community. And that's interesting. And as Hal says, they're visible. I've seen, by the way, people nowadays, you don't really take a Nazirite vow because you can't have a priest like let you out of it by offering a sacrifice. But I've seen people take on the spirit of a Nazirite vow, and their hair grows out long. Occasionally there are these people who make these sort of personal commitments, and it's weird. Like, you can see right away, oh, like, you are unkempt and right. Someone told me you were trying to do this Nazirite thing. So what does that do for the community? And is it a good thing? Is it good to know that, like, some people, we don't encourage everybody to push themselves to self-denial, if that is one of the things that the Nazirite vow is about. But it's good to have some, like, to even see not just that there are priests who were elected and they're in this holy space, but actually some people are really, it's good to know that some people are really devoted, and that's an option, and that we should be aware that people are in different spiritual places. And, there's something inspiring about seeing those real intense devotees. Okay. Brittany.
I'm so grateful, Hal, that you said what you said, because I feel like we might be sharing a brain a little bit. That's what I was thinking as well. When I was studying the Haftarah against this portion of Torah this week, what I noticed in the context of numbers is that there are many different functions that are being highlighted within the Torah portion. So we're looking at like chieftains, the Nazirites, the Levites, and then later on, we are eventually seeing prophets function in the society of Bnei Israel. And so what comes to mind when I think of the Nazirite vow is, why would God set aside this space for people to occupy in service of Bnei Israel? What would have to be happening around Bnei Israel for something like this to be a necessity? So the Levites have their function, and that's ritual, institutionalized practice. And then we have the chieftains, which is kind of this first response against oppressive space and oppressive societies. And that becomes the Sanhedrin, which is like kind of the lawmakers, upholders. And then the prophets have this other special function. So the Nazirites, why do they come up? Why do they exist? And I think it's important to contextualize that within the time that Samson arises as a Nazirite, because this is during the time when we're at war with the Philistines, I think. So I just think that it's interesting, like what is God, what kind of society is God setting up through this structure and through these positions?
Good.
And,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So that takes us into the Samson story. So what Brittany suggests is that the world that the Torah is imagining, it doesn't. I mean, as is often the case with the Torah, it doesn't exist yet. Like, they're giving these laws for what will be when they arrive in the land and build a society, but they don't have this whole society yet. Although I guess someone could have become a Nazir even on the journey, but it's just sort of, it almost seems theoretical. But when we get to the stories of Samuel, and then especially Samson, who is named as a Nazir, these aren't just random people who'd made spiritual commitments. These are the leaders of Israel. And Samson is not just the leader, but a warrior, a gibor, who will go to war with the Philistines and will, do great damage to them, will be sort of undefeatable until famously he kind of has his Nazirite vow broken. So Brittany asks, so what's we've been talking so far about the Nazirite who makes this choice, who has a spiritual experience, who plays a certain sort of extreme role in the social order. But what is it now that we're going to take that institution and use it in a very deliberate way to create a kind of powerful figure of leadership and resistance? Why is that person a Nazir? And what does that mean for that person also to be dedicated to God? Okay, so with that said, let's take a look now at the Samson story, because it's long and it's a good story, so we can read through it quickly. But for our purposes, there's much more. It goes on from here. There's much more to say about the Samson story. We're not going to cover it all. But what we're going to look at is just, again, the echoes of this Nazirite institution. What exactly is being asked here? And how is it different than what we've seen so far? Because yes, Brittany's right. Samson will be a very different kind of Nazir than we've seen so far. So let's take a look at the Samson story, which is just, we're not even going to meet Samson yet. This is like one of those stories, like the Samuel story, where the parents are wanting a child, anticipating, or being announced that they will have a child. There's something about this that is very, back to the days of Sarah and Abraham, like an announcement, a child will be born unto you. Speaking of Sarah and Abraham, take a look here at this is not really our topic for today, but I can't help but mention that this is a very weird story also because of the couple dynamics here are very strange. First of all, the woman is never named. She's just the wife of Manoah. So on the one hand, you might just roll your eyes and be like, biblical patriarchy. But on the other hand, she's not named, but she's the important one. And Manoah, I must say, looks sort of like a dope in this story. Like she's the spiritual designee. So let's take a look here at the story of Manoah and his wife, but really the wife of Manoah and Manoah, who are going to meet this man of God. All right, so let's take a look here. It's a great story, but again, I'm going to try to limit ourselves to just thinking about the Nazirite, the Nazirite issue. Okay. There was a certain man from Tzara, of the stock of Dan. He was from the tribe of Dan, whose name was Manoah. And his wife was infertile and had borne no children, or barren, infertile. This, again, evokes a lot of the stories of the early patriarchs and matriarchs who struggled to conceive. Okay. And an angel of God appeared to the woman. Okay, boom. So that was it. First of all, angel of God appears to the woman. And it's not like they called out, they pleaded, we know that they will, but just the angel of God just appears and said to her, you are infertile and have borne no children, but you shall conceive. And I must say, by the way, it's all like, I've been reminded helpfully that like what may have been perceived as female infertility here, like who knows who wasn't, what system wasn't firing. So, the woman is often identified as barren or infertile, but you remember the story of Abraham and Sarah. It probably also has something to do with the fact that Abraham is 100 years old. So we just wonder what the backstory is here, but we'll leave it for now. So you're going to conceive and bear a son. Now, be careful not to drink any wine or other intoxicant. Okay, same language there that we saw earlier. Al tishti yain v'sheichar. Yain v'sheichar, I should say. No wine or any other intoxicant. V'al tochli kol tameh, or to eat anything impure. Okay, so that's what we got there. Not a whole list of all the grape products, but don't get drunk and don't eat impure things. For you are going to conceive and bear a son. Inachara v'yoladet ben. Umora lo yale al rosho. And do not let a razor touch his head. Okay, that's also familiar, and that will become a big feature of Samson's life. For the boy is to be a Nazirite to God from the womb on. Ki nazir elokim ye'anar min habaten. He'll be born a Nazir. Okay, so that's the most obvious. When I stop in a second and say, what's different about this? The most obvious thing is he's born a Nazir. And he shall be the first to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Okay, he's the first. There will be many more, but this is the first great warrior of Israel. Okay, and the woman went and told her husband, an angel of God came to me, and he looked like an angel of God, very frightening. They don't know exactly what's going on. It's just, and it says here an agent of God, but it actually just says, a man of God. A man of God came to me, and he looked like an angel of God, very, very frightening. And I didn't ask him where he was from, nor did he tell me his name. And he said, you're going to conceive and bear a son, drink no wine or other intoxicant, and eat nothing impure, for the boy is to be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Okay, now I think, let me just stop here so as to not just like bury us in text and ask the question, okay, what's different so far? Well, what were the Nazirite, the terms of the Nazirite vow? You take the vow, you don't consume any intoxicants or grape products, you don't cut your hair, and you don't touch dead people. Okay, This Nazirite is different because, one, he will be born a Nazirite, right? And presumably, as we said, just be from the womb on, he will just be a Nazirite. What else is different? He will not cut his hair, and that's for his whole life, it seems. But as for the other things, there are two differences. Okay, one, we've had no mention of touching the dead, and there's debate. Was Samson not supposed to touch the dead? He does end up touching the dead, so right. And then the other thing is what? His mother doesn't drink alcohol, and it sounds like just for the term of her pregnancy, but he does. He drinks wine later in the story. He doesn't seem actually like an ascetic at all, is sort of part of the point. He's a wild man. He's running around, drinking and cavorting and, with ladies aplenty and, just like seems to be a party animal, but he's strong and he does win battles. It's not, but okay. So now that we have that in place, we're going to take a look at the rest of the story, but let's start to answer Brittany's question. Why would we borrow, or why would the book of Judges borrow from this earlier institution of the Nazirite that we've been discussing so far, and use it as a way of birthing a miracle child, right? And committing him to the Nazirite regime, but in kind of a different way. It's like he doesn't have all of the prohibitions. His mom took on some of them. So I don't know, why would we use the Nazirite institution as a way of electing this new leader? What's going on here? Any thoughts on that, Matt?
To bring another perspective in here again, I think the tension is between Nazirites and Levites, that there are two different paths from God. That is, the vow isn't what's going on because it's God assigning this. So I think what's happening is that Judges is a story about one path from God to doing things, and that in the Nazirite vow text, what we get is a reining in of Nazirites, because we're going to be promoting Levites as that path. So I think that's the tension and conflict here.
Interesting. Okay, that's good.
And I want to say this is one of the times where I'm seeing this rather than, I read something and I'm telling you I may be totally wrong, but it's at least something that I'm seeing here based on.
No, I think that's a really interesting theory. I mean, I can't say, I need to think about it, but it's an interesting theory. If the Nazirite is like a priest, right, or the priest which come from the tribe of Levi, if the Nazirite is a sort of like elected holy official, representative God, dedicated to God, and we said that before, and it gives an opportunity for someone to kind of take on a priestly or a Levitical spirit. So then, yeah, I think that this is a worthy heuristic device to think about whether the Nazirites are often, these elected Nazirites, sort of in a way, just like a person can choose to be a sort of pseudo priest, maybe these are taking place in contexts where we are turning to a different kind of leadership. The case of Samuel, which we're not looking at today, which again is not explicitly a Nazirite case, but Samuel emerges in a story where the priests have gone corrupt and are not, that lineage is not to be trusted. So like, what would it mean instead for God to just say, you'll forget about this other ruling class, you'll be the holy one, right? And there's like this way in which this is a different model where someone could commit to or be committed to a holy path because they're just the right person, because they have that internal inclination, or because God has elected them to be the right person. But it's like not the institution of holy people that we sometimes turn to serve as the representatives of God, but sometimes they go astray, so we don't. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Hannah Chassid.
So just two thoughts about the whole topic. We've spoken about self-denial and abstaining and that kind of languaging, or restrictions. We have that. Somebody asked about what are contemporary times. I mean, just taking Shabbat. All the restrictions or abstainings, that's almost an outsider's view that there's the limiting of certain kinds of activities sets it apart for a different focus, for conscious meditation, for creating more holiness. That might be one contemporary something, but just, is it even really self-denial or abstaining, or is it restriction, gevura, to allow this other holiness to arise? And in that topic of holiness, you've spoken several times of separation, the way Nazir and the vows separate out. I'm not fluent in Hebrew, but I think if I've heard, if I remember correctly, that holiness itself, that you make something kadosh, that there's separation, you make a distinction. And so I'm just seeing that listening to all of this through the lens of those two thoughts. That's all.
Okay, beautiful. That's a wonderful sort of a continuation of this thinking that we're doing. What does it mean to move from this individual, personal sort of spiritual act of devotion to a Nazir leadership or a Nazir designee? And yeah, maybe part of what we were thinking about with the individual Nazir, we can think about, or this sort of voluntary Nazir, we can think about also with these big, kind of larger than life Nazir figures. And part of what we're saying is, when someone is tapped in that way, when someone is going to lead the charge and be the representative and really step up for God, there is, again, to borrow Alexander's language, a kind of a tzimtzum, you have to, in order to fill that role, there will have to be some kind of, there's something you have to give up for that. There's a certain, you have to create clear space for that kind of intense holy relationship. Even if you're not choosing it, it's, again, in this case, Samson is having it chosen for him. And I must say, maybe that's why he doesn't have all the restrictions. Because what, is he really not going to, have any contact with the dead or ever have a drink of wine for your entire life? But maybe like, well, at least one thing, at least the growing of the hair, there has to be some way in which you have like let go of something in order to fill this other space, or to allow, as you've been describing it actually more, to allow holiness to fill the space that you have created. And all of that, I must say, for another day, it gets very ironic in the Samson story, because he just, again, doesn't seem like such a holy guy. That's not he doesn't seem like he's created space and submitted himself to God. He actually seems in many times like an ego kind of run amok. But he does fight for God, and he does seem on some level he has been committed, and he takes seriously this commitment that he doesn't cut his hair. And when his hair is cut for him, he's cut off from that service. So there's some relationship between the giving up of one thing and the ability to fulfill another role, or to have another kind of contact. Okay, I want to read the rest of the story, and then I just we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to mention one other connection. We've now considered the Nazir, the sort of personal, voluntary Nazir, and the Nazir Shimshon, as they call it, the Nazir that's been designated to be a Nazir their whole lives. And these are very different figures. Let's take a look at the rest of the Samson story. And there's another connection I want to make here, because obviously there's a connection from the Nazir in our Parsha to the Nazir of Samson. They're called Nazirs. But there's another scene. I'm going to read now the rest of the story and tell me if you can identify what other scene this story is sort of unexpectedly calling up for us. And let's take a look here. This is the Haftarah. We're just finishing from this week's Parsha. Okay, so Manoach said to the angel of God, let us detain you. Oh, wait, hold on. Did I read this? I didn't read this. So Manoach pleaded with God, oh, my sovereign, please let the angel, it's not agent, the man of God, that you sent come to us again and let him instruct us on how to act with the child. And God heeded Manoach's plea, and the angel of God came to the woman again. Now, listen, Manoach prays to God, but when God responds, it comes to the woman, not to Manoach. So that is sort of interesting what role Manoach plays here. She was sitting in the field and her husband Manoach was not with her. And also, I must say, if we're reading it sort of with literary eyes, it's also like his wife is out there with some other man, some man of God, and he keeps sort of like, wait, where is she? What's going on? Who is this? So the woman ran in haste to tell her husband, and she said, the man who came to me before has just appeared to me. So then he promptly followed his wife, and he came to that figure and he said, are you the one that spoke to my wife? Like, yes. May your words soon come true. What rules should be observed for the boy? And the angel of God said to Manoach, the woman must abstain from all the things which I warned her. Like, I already spoke to your wife about this. Like, what is your, like, what do you need to know this? Like, I already told her. She must not have eaten anything that comes from the grapevine. And here you do get a sense that it's being expanded a little bit. It's any grape product, or drink wine or any other intoxicant, or eat anything impure. She must observe all that I commanded her. Now, okay, that's the back and forth with the angel. And then check this out. Manoach said to the angel of God, let us detain you and prepare a kid for you, a goat for you. But the angel of God said, if you detain me, I shall not eat your food. And if you present a burnt offering, then offer that to God. Because Manoach did not know that he was an angel of God, a man of God, a prophet, but not an angel of God. So Manoach said to the angel of God, what is your name? We would like to honor you when your words come true. And the angel said, why do you ask my name? Lama zeh tishal lishmi? It is unknowable. V'hu peli. Okay. Now, first of all, this language of it's unknowable, that's the same language that we noted above with the vow, to make a Nazir's vow. So there's a connection there. But more striking is this phrase, Lama zeh tishal lishmi? Why do you ask my name? Who else says, why do you ask my name? Some of you know. Richard, give it to us.
The angel that wrestles with Jacob.
That's right. That's right. So the angel that wrestles with Jacob, when Jacob has that like famous night wrestling an angel, Jacob was left alone. And remember, the angel is not called an angel, but called just a man, like the man of God in our story. And they wrestle for a while, and then the angel says, what is your name? Which is language we've heard before. But then Jacob says, well, you tell me your name. And the angel says, Lama zeh tishal lishmi? Why do you ask my name? That kind of full phrase repetition is not a coincidence. You saw that exactly above here, Lama zeh tishal lishmi. Okay, so that's interesting. Like the Samson story, the story of this lifetime Nazir, already is a new spin on the Nazir that we see in our Parsha. But the Samson story also asks us to remember the Jacob story. And I'll just say one more thing, and then we'll have to close. Who is the first person in our tradition to ever make a vow? It is Jacob. It is Jacob. And the wrestling with the angel happens at the end of Jacob's long journey to the house of Lavan, to Haran, where he spends 2 decades and works and labors and has children and wives and just a crazy life. But that story, that journey begins with Jacob having a dream about a ladder. And then when he wakes up, he vows a vow saying, if God remains with me, protecting me on this journey I'm making and giving me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safe to my father's house, then God shall be my God. Okay, so, right, so this is how the journey begins. And then at the end of the journey, 20 years later, he has this night with the angel, and we see some of the same language that we find in the Samson story. So what do we have here? We have the Nazir from our Parsha, who elects to be a Nazir. We have Samson, who's born into a Nazirite status, and it's different, but we've wondered a little bit about what might be similar in those kinds of commitments. And then we have these stories sort of hinting to us that we should think also about Jacob, the first person to make a vow, who certainly was not a Nazir and didn't take the same kinds of abstentions. But I want to just close by asking us to think about what it might mean that sometimes you make the official Nazir vow for yourself. Sometimes there are folks who are tapped to become a Nazir, but maybe the story of Jacob is also, like, maybe we're referencing the story of Jacob as a way of saying, you know, sometimes periods of our life can be like a Nazirite period. That, like, sometimes in the middle of your life, and you're not officially taking a Nazirite vow, but there's ways of thinking of a whole life or a part of a life as vowed, designated, devoted to God in a certain way, and sort of that is perhaps a more common feature of religious life than the extreme case of the Nazirite vow might allow for. Okay, I see one hand up, and we'll just end with one comment from Jen.
I'm really touched by what you just said, and it really brings some threads together for me, because I was thinking about how all these stories have an adjacency to death. Like, if you have to avoid dead bodies, you're thinking about death. Like, it makes death more present in your mind if you have to avoid it rather than less. Samson was born and dedicated as a Nazirite because of barrenness and became someone really good at dealing death as a result of it. And Jacob even says, you know, I saw this and yet my life was spared. So I'm thinking about how a Nazirite lives in this intersection between life and death on some level. And then I'm thinking about, like, the time in my life where death loomed so closely to me multiple times in my life. And the sacredness that happened there, the, like, separation from normal life and different relationship with God that I took, and then I took out of that. That feels like an example of what you were talking about sometimes in our lives, we become those, whether we choose it or not. Yeah.
Excellent. A beautiful analysis on many levels. And I'm grateful that you pointed out another connection there that also ties these stories together. And we'll end with this. That's right. Manoach said to his wife, we will surely die, for we have seen a divine being. Oh my gosh. And meanwhile, his wife once again is like, no, you're wrong. Like, you've got it wrong. But, like, another time we'll explore the dynamic between these two. But we will surely die before we have seen a divine being. Mot namut ki Elokim ra'inu. And that's very similar to what Jacob says at the end. I have seen a divine being face to face, yet I have not died. Vatinatzel nafshi. So I think Jen is picking up on something really important here. The Nazirite who sort of, like, removes themselves from death, but is in contact with God, and God is a dangerous force. God is sort of annihilating. And seems to be a sort of balancing of sort of spiritual energies where you have to abstain in one way in order to be open to some other kind of force, which itself is deadly. So you're kind of balancing your contact with the dead, and so it is that we can see all of these episodes as instances of someone who is devoting themselves to some intense experience, some commitment to God, some sacrifice, in order to gain, in order to move forward, in order to get something out of it. But in order to do that, they're going to have to give something up. They're going to have to use language that many have used, to create space to let that other intense force flow in. And where the Nazir in our Parsha first appears to us to be a very kind of unique, idiosyncratic, specialized experience, maybe the appearance of Samson later, and then the reminder of the similarities to other stories of sacrifice and the devotion of a period of time of life, actually maybe starts to tell us that this is a more common feature of life than we might first think. And what the Nazir represents is an official and explicit, very particular expression of some larger human theme, which is sometimes I have to devote myself to something. And in order to do that, I have to draw some boundary lines around myself to create a space where I can do something special, but not if I'm too tethered to or worrying about or consumed with other things, be they wine, be they my looks and my appearance, or be they my losses and death itself. Like sometimes I will have to even extract myself from the personal concerns of my life in order to seek something greater. Anyway, lots more to explore here, but thank you everybody for your Torah, and I look forward to learning with you again next week. All right. We're back on for the next 2 weeks, and we will eventually take a break for the summer, but I'll see you next week. Bye, all.